Welcome to In This Channel, where every night, a new horror story drags you deeper than the last. Before anything else, hit subscribe right now. If you miss even one night, you'll miss the piece that connects all these stories into something far darker. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know exactly who's awake inside the dark with us. And listen carefully. This story has something hidden, a moment so disturbing, so unexpected, that most people don't recognize it until the very end. If you leave early, you'll never know what really happened. So stay with me all the way to the final second. Jake Hendricks had been hauling freight across the Midwest for 17 years, and in all that time, he'd never seen anything that shook him enough to consider quitting. He was a practical man, the kind who believed in what he could see, touch, and explain with logic. That November night on Interstate 80 through Nebraska changed everything. It was 2 a.m. when he first noticed the truck in his mirrors. The rig was identical to his own, same Peterbilt 579, same red paint job, same company logo on the trailer. At first, Jake thought it was just another driver from his fleet, maybe someone he'd meet at the next truck stop, but something felt wrong. The truck maintained an exact distance behind him, matching his speed perfectly, staying precisely 3 car lengths back, no matter how he adjusted his pace. Jake tried slowing down to 60. The mirror truck slowed. He accelerated to 75. It accelerated. He grabbed his CB radio and called out on channel 19, asking if anyone was tailing him. Static answered, thick and crackling with an underlying sound that resembled breathing. He switched channels. More static. Every single channel produced the same wet, rhythmic noise. The highway stretched empty in both directions. No other vehicles in sight despite this being a major interstate. Jake noticed the mile markers weren't progressing normally. He passed mile marker 279, then 4 minutes later mile marker 281. The numbers were increasing, but the landscape outside remained identical. The same cluster of dead trees, the same abandoned barn, the same rusted grain silo passing by his window every few minutes as if caught in a loop. His GPS showed him moving forward, the blue dot crawling along the mapped route, but the world outside told a different story. Jakey's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. He'd been driving for what felt like hours since noticing the mirror truck, but his dashboard clock insisted only 12 minutes had passed since 20:47 a.m. The numbers wouldn't change. 2047 to 2047. In his side mirror, the driver of the following truck became visible as they passed under a highway light. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The driver looked exactly like him. Same beard, same blue cap, same scar on his left cheek from a childhood accident. But the expression was wrong. The mirror Jake was screaming, mouth open impossibly wide, eyes filled with terror, hands beating against the windshield, as if trying to escape from inside his own truck. Jake jerked his eyes back to the road and slammed the brakes. His rig shuddered and slowed, tires screaming against asphalt. In his mirrors, the other truck didn't slow. It should have collided with him, but instead, it passed through his trailer like smoke, emerging from the front of his cab. For a brief, horrible moment, Jake was staring at the back of his own head through his windshield, watching himself drive a truck that occupied the same space as his own. Then everything snapped. The mirror truck was ahead of him now, pulling away rapidly. The CB radio erupted with voices, dozens of truckers on channel 19 discussing weather and routes and load times. The clock jumped to 3:15 a.m. Mile markers began progressing normally. The landscape finally changed, showing new terrain, different trees, a town's lights in the distance. Jake pulled into the next rest area, hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the steering wheel. He stumbled out of his cab and walked around his truck 3 times, checking every surface, every panel. Everything appeared normal. But when he looked at his logbook, he found an entry in his own handwriting that he didn't remember making. 3 Neo to arrive I 80 Y September on Mercigar 279 Tom Pika IT Steel on my NTR. The timestamp was wrong. It was currently 3:22 a.m. The entry was dated for 25 minutes in the future. Jake grabbed his phone and took a picture of the page, watching as the image appeared on his screen. In the photo, additional text appeared below the original entry, words that weren't visible on the physical page. I've been driving this loop for 3 years. Every night I pass myself. Every night I try to warn myself, you got out. I never did. Please remember me. Please tell Sarah I tried to come home. Jake didn't have a wife or girlfriend named Sarah. He'd been divorced for 5 years, no serious relationships since. He climbed back into his cab and opened his glove compartment, looking for something, though he didn't know what. Behind his registration papers, he found a photograph he'd never seen before, himself standing next to a dark-haired woman in front of his truck, both smiling, her hand showing an engagement ring. On the back, written in his handwriting, May and Sarah, 1 week before the disappearance. Nebraska, October 2019. It was currently November 2022. Jake had been driving professionally since 2006. He had no memory of 2019 being anything other than ordinary. No memory of anyone named Sarah. No memory of any disappearance. But his hands remembered holding the pen that wrote those words. His chest ached with a loss he couldn't explain, grief for a woman he'd never met, but somehow missed desperately. He pulled out his phone and searched his own name plus missing and Nebraska. The results made his blood run cold. Multiple news articles from November 2019 reported that driver Jake Hendricks had vanished on Interstate 80. His truck was found idling on the shoulder near mile marker 279, engine running, logbook open, but no driver. The case remained unsolved. His fiancée, Sarah Morrison, was quoted in several articles pleading for information. Jake looked at his driver's license, issued in 2021. He looked at his employment records, hired by his current company in 2020. He checked his phone's photo gallery. The earliest photo was from January 2020, showing him standing next to his truck on his first day, though he remembered having this job for years. As dawn broke over the Nebraska plains, Jake sat in his cab and tried to understand which version of his life was real. The version where he'd been driving for 17 years, or the version where he'd been missing for 3 years before somehow reappearing with false memories. The photograph of Sarah burned in his hand. Somewhere, somehow, another version of himself was still trapped in that loop, still driving past mile marker 279, still trying to get home to a woman this Jake didn't remember loving. He never drove Interstate 80 through Nebraska again, but sometimes, late at night when he was alone on empty highways, his CB radio would crackle with his own voice screaming for help, counting the number of times he'd passed himself, begging someone to remember Sarah. 2. STORLDTAT. Marcus Webb prided himself on never picking up hitchhikers in his 22 years of long-haul trucking. He'd heard all the horror stories and had a strict policy. If you didn't work for the company, you didn't ride in his truck. But on a freezing February night on Road 287 through Wyoming, Marcus broke his rule, and it cost him something he could never get back. The man appeared suddenly in his headlights, standing on the shoulder in a white T-shirt despite the negative temperatures. Marcus's first instinct was to drive past, but something about the scene felt wrong. No car in sight, no jacket, skin that should have been blue with hypothermia, but looked perfectly normal. The man wasn't shivering. He was just standing there, watching Marcus's truck approach with an expression of patient waiting. Against every instinct, Marcus stopped. He told himself it was the right thing to do. that leaving someone in these conditions was murder. He opened the passenger door, and the man climbed in without a word, bringing with him not the expected blast of cold air, but a warmth that felt wrong, like opening an oven. The temperature in the cab spiked 20 degrees in seconds.
"Thanks for stopping,"
the man said. His voice sounded normal enough, friendly even, with a slight southern accent. Most people don't anymore. "Not since I've been waiting here." "How long were you out there?" Marcus asked, pulling back onto the highway. "You should be frozen solid?" "Time's different for me now," the passenger replied. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, unblinking. "I've been waiting on this stretch of road since the accident." That was in 1987, March 14th, 11:43 p.m. The semi that hit us never stopped. Did you know that? Just kept driving while we burned. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. "Buddy, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but you can see through me a little bit, can't you?" The passenger interrupted. "If you look at me against the window, go ahead, look." Marcus didn't want to look, but his eyes betrayed him, glancing right against the darkness of the passenger window. He could see the faint outline of the landscape beyond through the man's torso. Not completely transparent, but definitely not solid. Like looking at someone through frosted glass. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed, jerking his attention back to the road. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you?"
"I'm Thomas Garrett."
"I'm 34 years old." I was 34 years old. I was driving home to Casper with my wife and daughter when your truck hit us. The passenger's voice remained calm, conversational. "I've been waiting for you specifically, Marcus. Did you know that? I've been standing on this road for 36 years, and hundreds of trucks have passed, but only you stopped. Only you could see me." "That's impossible," Marcus said. His mouth had gone dry. "I've never been on this route before. I didn't hit anyone I would remember." "You're confused. The driver who hit you must have been someone else." "You haven't done it yet," Thomas said simply. He turned to look at Marcus for the first time, and his eyes were empty sockets, dark and deep. "You're going to do it 90 miles from here. There's going to be fog. You're going to be tired. You've been driving for 11 hours already, and you're going to push yourself for 3 more to make your delivery window. You're going to see us too late. A blue Honda Civic. You're going to hear the crunch of metal, see the sparks, watch us roll and catch fire in your mirrors. And you're going to keep driving because you'll panic, because you'll be afraid of losing your license, your livelihood, everything you've worked for." Marcus's breath came in short gasps. This was insane. This was impossible. But the temperature in the cab continued to rise, now uncomfortably hot despite the winter night outside. Sweat rolled down his back. The passenger's form flickered like a bad television signal. "I'm giving you a choice," Thomas continued. "You can pull over right now, right here at mile marker 43. You can sleep for 4 hours. When you wake up, I'll be gone, and you'll drive the rest of the route safely. You'll miss your delivery window. You might even lose this contract. But my family will live. My daughter Sarah will grow up. She'll become a doctor. She'll save hundreds of lives. My wife Rebecca will remarry eventually. She'll find happiness again. The future will be different. And if I don't stop," Marcus heard himself ask, "then everything happens the way I remember it. Except this time you'll know. You'll spend the next 36 years knowing you were warned. You'll drive this route again in 2059, and you'll see me standing on the shoulder, and maybe you'll pick yourself up, and you'll have this same conversation with yourself. Time is a loop here, Marcus. This moment has happened before. It will happen again. We're caught in the space between what happened and what could have happened, and the road won't let us go." Marcus looked at his GPS, mile marker 40. 3 was 2 miles ahead. His delivery was due in Dallas at 60 a.m., and if he missed that window, the company would drop his contract. 6 months of guaranteed income gone. He had child support payments, truck payments, a mountain of debt. 4 hours of sleep would ruin everything, but in his peripheral vision, he could see Thomas more clearly now. The man's shirt was shredded and burned. Dark stains covered his torso. The left side of his face was caved in, showing bone beneath torn skin. This was no prank, no drug-induced hallucination. This was something else. Something that shouldn't exist but did. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Marcus whispered. "How do I know there will even be fog, or a blue Civic, or any of it?" "You don't," Thomas said. "That's the horrible part. You have to choose based on faith. Faith that I'm real. Faith that you're capable of murder. Faith that the future isn't fixed." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was desperate. "Please, please stop the truck. I've lived through this so many times. I've watched my daughter die in the back seat so many times. I can hear her crying for me. She was only 7. Please." Mile marker 40, 3 appeared in the headlights. Marcus's foot hovered over the brake. 4 hours of sleep, 1 contract. Against a story from a possible ghost about a possible future accident. It was madness. It was career suicide. It was... He pressed the accelerator and drove past the mile marker. "I'm sorry," he said, but the passenger seat was empty. Thomas was gone as if he'd never existed. The temperature in the cab returned to normal. Marcus was alone with his choice, his doubt, and 90 miles of dark highway ahead. The fog rolled in 40 minutes later, thick and sudden, reducing visibility to 20 feet. Marcus slowed to 50 miles per hour, then 40, his hands aching from gripping the wheel. His eyes burned with exhaustion and the strain of trying to see through the gray wall ahead. Every mile felt like 10. Every shadow could be a vehicle. Then, for just a moment, the fog cleared. He saw them directly ahead, a blue Honda Civic stopped in the right lane, hazard lights flashing, a woman standing outside, waving frantically, a small figure visible in the back seat. Marcus's brain screamed at him to stop, to swerve, to do something. But his body was already in motion, reflexes taking over after 11 hours of driving. He jerked the wheel left, felt the truck's trailer begin to swing wide. He saw the woman's face in his headlights, saw the moment her expression changed from hope to terror. He felt more than heard the impact, a sickening crunch that reverberated through the entire rig. His truck shuddered but stayed upright, kept rolling. Marcus looked in his side mirror and saw fire blooming orange in the fog behind him, saw the Honda rolling, sparks fontaining into the darkness. And he kept driving. He told himself he would call 911 at the next exit. He told himself he needed to get somewhere safe to stop. He told himself there was nothing he could do now anyway. He told himself these lies for 36 years. Every night, when he closed his eyes, he saw Thomas Garrett standing on the shoulder of Route 287. Every night, he heard a little girl crying. And every night, he wondered if the next time he drove that stretch of highway, he would see himself standing there in the dark, waiting for himself to stop, trapped in an endless loop of the worst decision he ever made. The passenger seat remained empty, but Marcus never felt alone again. Dennis Kowalski had crossed the way station on Highway 95 through Idaho hundreds of times in his 14-year career. It was a standard facility, small building, inspection bays, scales, board-out officers checking logbooks and equipment. He knew the routine: pull in, stop on the scale, wait for the green light, proceed if everything checked out. Simple, predictable, safe. But on the night of August 9th, 2021, Dennis pulled into a way station that shouldn't have existed. It was 1:18 a.m., and he was hauling refrigerated produce from Boise to Spokane. The electronic sign at mile marker 217 instructed all commercial vehicles to enter the weigh station, which was unusual given the late hour. Most stations closed by midnight. Still, ignoring a mandatory pull in could cost him a hefty fine, so Dennis guided his rig onto the exit ramp. The facility looked different from how he remembered. The building was larger, more modern, with harsh LED lights that turned everything a sterile white. The parking area was empty except for one other semi, a beat-up Freightliner with an unmarked trailer, sitting motionless in the far corner. No lights in the cab, no driver visible. Dennis rolled onto the scale and waited. The electronic display cycled through numbers but never settled on his actual weight. Instead, the numbers climbed steadily higher: 48,000 pounds, 52,060, 75,000. His truck and loaded trailer shouldn't weigh more than 55,000 pounds. The display reached 90,000, then 120,000. Then the numbers stopped making sense: 340,000, 80, 92,000, 450,000 pounds. The intercom crackled. "Please proceed to inspection bay 3, a voice said. It sounded human but wrong, like multiple voices speaking in perfect unison, male and female and child, like all at once. Dennis's instincts screamed at him to leave, to blow through whatever gate blocked his exit, and deal with the consequences later. But when he looked in his mirrors, the entrance ramp he just used had vanished. Behind him was only a concrete wall, gray and featureless, as if the weigh-in had never existed. "Inspection bay 3, the voice repeated. "Inspection is mandatory. Inspection is for your safety. Inspection will be brief." The scales platform tilted forward, physically forcing his truck toward the inspection bays. Dennis tried reversing, but his transmission wouldn't engage. The truck rolled forward on its own, steering wheel turning in his hands, guiding itself into the third bay. The hydraulic door dropped behind him with a final sounding crash. The bay was too large. That was Dennis's first coherent thought. The ceiling stretched up at least 50 feet, and the space extended backward into darkness that his headlights couldn't penetrate. The walls were covered in what looked like inspection notices and safety posters, but the text was wrong: strings of numbers and symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to rearrange themselves when he tried to focus on them. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead. It wore a doughty officer's uniform, complete with badge and clipboard, but it was too tall, at least 7 feet, with proportions that weren't quite human. The arms hung slightly too long. The head sat slightly too far forward on the shoulders. When it moved closer to the truck, Dennis saw its face and wished desperately that he hadn't. The face was a composite of every dude officer he'd ever encountered. Dozens of features overlaid on one another, multiple sets of eyes, noses, mouths, all shifting and rearranging like a shuffled deck of cards. One moment it had the scarred chin of Officer Patterson from the boys' station. The next, the wire-rimmed glasses of Officer Chen from Seattle. The features cycled rapidly, never settling into one consistent face. "Open your doors," the thing said. "Open your cargo. Inspection is mandatory. We must verify contents. We must verify that you are carrying what you think you are carrying." Dennis didn't move. His hands were frozen on the steering wheel, every muscle locked. Through his side mirror, he could see the other truck, the Freightliner in the corner. Its trailer doors were open now, hanging loose. Something was moving inside, shapes that were too large for the trailer's dimensions, forms that extended beyond the physical boundaries of the cargo space, as if the interior existed in more space than the exterior contained. "Your cargo is not what you think," the composite officer said. It was standing directly beside his door now, face pressed against the window. All of its mouths smiled in unison. "You believe you are carrying produce, lettuce, tomatoes, bell peppers, 48,000 pounds of vegetables. But you have not checked your load since departure. You trusted the loading crew. You always trust the loading crew.
That is your mistake.
Dennis found his voice. What are you talking about? I watched them load it. I signed the manifest.
It's produce, that's all.
Open your doors, the thing repeated, or we will open them for you. We must inspect. We must verify. The contents have been changing during transport. They have been becoming. They are almost ready. You have been carrying them across state lines, feeding them with motion, with time, with distance. They are grateful. They want to thank you personally. The temperature in the cab dropped 30 degrees in seconds. Dennis could see his breath. The composite officer raised one long arm and pointed at the trailer behind Dennis's cab. Listen, it said. They are eager. Dennis heard it then. Sounds from inside his sealed refrigerated trailer. Scratching, dragging, wet, sliding noises like raw meat being pulled across metal. And worst of all, breathing. Dozens of voices inhaling and exhaling in rhythm, pressed against the inside of the trailer walls. I want to leave, Dennis said. His voice came out as a whisper. I want to leave right now. Let me out. I'll abandon the load. I'll report it stolen. Just open the door and let me go. The inspection is not complete, the officer said. You must be present for inspection. You must see what you have been carrying. You must understand what you have helped bring into being. Transportation is creation. Movement is transformation. You are not merely a driver. You are a catalyst. You are essential. The scratching inside the trailer grew more frantic. Dennis heard metal groaning, rivets popping. Whatever was in there was trying to get out. The things he thought were produce, except he couldn't actually remember loading produce, couldn't picture the specific boxes or pallets, could only remember the general idea of loading, the concept of it, as if the memory had been placed in his mind rather than experienced. What had he actually loaded in boys? The composite officer's hand, pale, too many fingers, gripped Dennis's door handle. Final inspection begins now. Exit your vehicle. View your cargo. Accept your role. The distance between Boise and Spokane is the correct distance. The time between loading and delivery is the correct duration. They are ready. We are ready. You are ready. The door lock disengaged on its own. The handle turned. Cold air rushed in, carrying a smell of chemicals and decay, and something else. Something organic but wrong. Dennis did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed his CB radio, yanked it off its mount, and smashed it through the windshield of his own truck. The safety glass cracked into a spider web of fractures but held. Dennis hit it again, then again, until a hole opened large enough to crawl through. He threw himself forward onto the hood of his truck, rolled off onto the concrete floor of the inspection bay, and ran into the darkness at the back of the space. Behind him, the composite officer shrieked, a sound made by dozens of voices screaming different words simultaneously. The trailer doors burst open with a metallic scream. Dennis didn't look back. He ran blindly into the dark, hands outstretched, expecting any moment to hit a wall, to be grabbed, to be pulled back into whatever nightmare the way station had become. Instead, he ran straight into bright sunlight. He stumbled and fell onto hot asphalt, blinking against the sudden glare. When his eyes adjusted, he found himself lying on the shoulder of Highway 95, 50 feet beyond the way station entrance ramp. His truck was gone. The way station itself was there, but it looked old, abandoned. The building half collapsed with Sea City 2003 spray painted across the front. Dennis scrambled to his feet and checked his phone. 10:47 a.m., only 29 minutes since he'd pulled into the station. He called his dispatch immediately, reported the truck stolen, told them he'd been carjacked at the way station. Police came, took his statement, looked at him with skeptical eyes when he couldn't provide consistent details. His truck was found 3 days later, parked behind a truck stop in Coeur d'Alene. The trailer was empty. The refrigeration unit had been running the entire time, set to 32 degrees. The interior was spotless, recently cleaned, no trace of cargo. The loading manifest in the cab listed the produced shipment, but when police checked with the facility in Boise, no record of that shipment existed. No one remembered loading Dennis's truck that night. Dennis found one thing in the cab that convinced him he hadn't imagined it all: a clipboard on the passenger seat, official DOT inspection form, stamped and signed. The vehicle contents section listed: produce, meet, passengers, human driver, distance traveled susformation, 94% complete, status released for final delivery. At the bottom, in the inspector name field, his own signature appeared 12 times in 12 different handwriting styles, as if he'd somehow inspected himself, verified himself, approved himself for whatever had been growing in his trailer during those lost hours. Dennis never drove commercially again, but sometimes, late at night, he'll check trucking forums and news reports, looking for stories of strange accidents, unexplained incidents, missing drivers. And he wonders how many of them pulled into that waste station, how many transported things they couldn't see, how many unknowingly helped something terrible travel from one place to another, using America's highways as veins to spread throughout the country's body. He still sees the composite officer's face in crowds sometimes, recognizes one of its borrowed features on a stranger's face, a particular nose or chin or set of eyes, and he wonders if it's still inspecting, still collecting, still waiting for the next driver to stop at a station that officially closed 19 years ago. Rita Saunders had been a long-haul trucker for 19 years, and in that time, she'd heard every kind of conversation imaginable on the CB radio. Truckers were a chatty bunch, especially during the lonely hours between midnight and dawn. She'd heard ghost stories, conspiracy theories, relationship advice, and enough dirty jokes to fill a library. But she'd never heard anything like the transmission that came through on Channel 19 as she crossed the Mojave Desert on Interstate 40. It was 3:37 a.m. on a moonless October night. Rita was hauling electronics from Barstow to Albuquerque, running ahead of schedule, enjoying the empty highway. Her CB had been quiet for the last hour, unusual for Channel 19, which typically carried near constant chatter. She'd flipped through the other channels earlier and found the same unusual silence on all of them, just clean carrier waves and occasional static pops. Then a voice came through, clear as if the speaker was sitting in her passenger seat. Westbound driver at mile marker 87. Do you copy? Rita glanced at her GPS. She was at mile marker 87.3 heading eastbound. This is Rita eastbound at 87, she responded. You looking for someone specific? Driver. I'm looking for you, Rita, the voice said. It was male, middle-aged, with an accent she couldn't quite place. I've been trying to reach you for a very long time. Decades, in fact.
Do you know what year it is where you are?
Rita frowned. It's 2022, October 14th.
Who is this?
I was afraid of that, the voice said. There was a long pause filled with static. Then, Rita, this is going to sound insane, but I need you to listen carefully. My name is Michael Saunders. I'm your son. I'm 43 years old, and I'm calling you from the year 2051. You're going to have me in 7 years. You're going to name me after your father. And I'm trying to warn you about what happens next. Rita nearly swerved off the road. She didn't have any children. She'd never been pregnant. The idea of having a son named Michael seemed absurd. Her father, Michael, had died when she was 16, and the name carried too much pain to pass on. This is a hell of a prank, buddy, she said, but her voice shook. Mile marker 89 is coming up in about 2 minutes at your current speed. The voice continued. When you reach it, you're going to see a broken down truck on the shoulder. Older model Kenworth, white cab, unmarked trailer. There's going to be a man standing beside it, waving for help. His left hand will be bleeding, wrapped in what looks like a shirt. You're going to stop because that's who you are. You always stop to help. That's what I love about you, even though I never got to meet you. What are you talking about? Rita demanded. If I'm your mother, why haven't you met me? Because you disappear tonight, Michael said. His voice cracked with emotion. You stop for that man at mile marker 89. You're never seen again. Your truck is found 3 days later, abandoned at a rest area in Flagstaff, but you're gone. No body, no trace, no evidence. Just gone. I've spent my entire adult life trying to figure out what happened to you. I joined the police force. I became a detective. I worked cold cases. And 7 years ago, I found something that shouldn't exist, a way to send information backward through time, but only through certain channels, certain frequencies. CB channel 19 specifically when conditions are right, when the solar activity matches and the location aligns and the timeline is thin enough. Tonight is one of those nights. This is my only chance to warn you. Mile marker 88 appeared in Rita's headlights, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was crazy. This was impossible. But something in the voice felt true, felt real in a way that frightened her more than any horror story she'd heard on the CB. Don't stop, Michael pleaded. Whatever you do, don't stop for that truck. The man isn't human. I don't know what he is. The reports from other disappearances on this stretch of highway describe something that looks human until you get close. And then the witnesses who survived said the proportions were wrong, the movements were wrong, the eyes reflected light like an animal's. 8 other people have vanished at mile marker 89 over the last 60 years. Always truckers, always stopping to help what they think is a stranded driver. And they're never found. Rita's mouth had gone dry. If you're really my son, tell me something only I would know. Tell me something that proves this isn't just someone who researched me. Your real name is Margaret? Michael said immediately. You go by Rita, because that's what your grandmother called you, and she raised you after your parents died in a house fire when you were 11. You have a scar on your right shoulder blade shaped like a fish hook from when your Uncle Pierce took you fishing and the line snapped. You sing Johnny Cash songs when you think no one can hear you. Your favorite is I've Been Everywhere, because you want to go everywhere. You keep a photograph of a woman named Diana in your wallet, hidden behind your license, and sometimes you take it out and wonder what would have happened if you'd been braver. No one knows about Diana. You never told anyone. But you wrote about her in a journal that I found in a storage unit after you disappeared. And that's how I know. That's how I know you're real, and you're my mother, even though I never got to call you that. Rita's vision blurred with tears. The photograph of Diana was exactly where Michael said it was. Hidden, private, a secret shame and a beautiful memory that she'd never shared with another soul. No one could know that except. Mile marker 89 appeared ahead, and there, exactly as described, was the white Kenworth on the shoulder. A man stood beside it, waving his left hand. Even from a distance, Rita could see the dark stain on what looked like a makeshift bandage. I see it, she whispered into the CB. I see the truck. What do I do? Drive past, Michael said urgently. Don't slow down. Don't look at him. Just keep driving. If you stop, I lose you. I lose you before I ever exist. Please, Mom. Please just drive. Rita's foot hovered over the brake. Every instinct she had screamed at her to help. Someone was hurt. Someone needed assistance. This was the desert. Leaving someone stranded could mean their death. But Michael's voice was desperate, and the details he'd known were impossible to fake. The man on the shoulder turned as Rita's truck approached. She was still 500 feet away, but in her headlights, she could see his face clearly, too clearly, with detail that shouldn't be visible at this distance. He was smiling. His teeth were too white, too many, extending too far back in his mouth. His eyes caught her headlights and reflected green, like a cat's eyes, but brighter. Rita kept her foot on the accelerator and drove past. In her side mirror, she saw the man's head rotate to track her movement, turning 180 degrees without his body moving, neck twisting impossibly. His smile widened further, splitting his face nearly to his ears. Then he raised his left hand, the supposedly injured hand, and waved goodbye. The hand had 7 fingers, long and segmented like spider legs. "I'm past it," Rita said into the CB, her voice shaking. "I drove past. It's behind me. Michael, are you still there?" Static answered. She adjusted the squelch, switched channels, came back to 19. "Nothing but empty carrier wave? Michael?" She called again. "Are you there?" Did it work? No response. Rita drove in silence for the next hour, expecting every moment to see headlights rushing up behind her, expecting the white Kenworth to appear in pursuit. But the highway remained empty. She stopped at a truck stop in Flagstaff and called the highway patrol, reported a potentially dangerous situation at mile marker 89. They sent a unit to investigate and found nothing, no broken down truck, no stranded driver, no evidence anyone had been there. Rita completed her delivery and returned home to her apartment in Barstow. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, but when she opened her wallet to check, the photograph of Diana was gone. In its place was a different photo, Rita standing next to a teenage boy with her eyes and her father's smile. On the back, written in her own handwriting, but in ink that looked decades oldie, "Me and Michael, age 16. Best son a mother could ask for. Rita didn't remember taking that photo. She didn't remember raising a son. But when she looked in her bathroom mirror, she saw new lines on her face, a different quality to her eyes, the look of someone who'd lived a fuller life than she remembered. And when she checked her phone, there were text messages from someone saved as Michael, going back years, conversations about his cases, her routes, family dinners, shared jokes. 2 timelines had merged, and Rita existed in both. In one, she'd stopped at mile marker 89 and vanished, leaving behind a son who never knew her. In the other, she'd somehow always had Michael, somehow always been the mother he remembered. The CB radio transmission had rewritten the past, or created a new present, or simply allowed 2 versions of reality to exist simultaneously. She kept driving, kept hauling freight across the Southwest, but she never drove past mile marker 89 again. And sometimes, late at night, her CB radio would crackle to life with a young man's voice saying, "Thanks, Mom. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being brave enough to believe." And Rita would smile and key the mic and say, "Anytime, sweetheart. I'll always listen for you." Somewhere in the quantum foam of possible timelines, a woman named Rita disappeared forever. But in this timeline, she got to watch her son grow up, even if she didn't remember all the moments. Memory might be unreliable, but love persisted across timelines, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't exist, connecting people who found each other despite the universe trying to keep them apart. The white Kenworth still waits at mile marker 89, and the thing that looks almost human still waves its 7-fingered hand at passing truckers, patient and eternal. But Rita Saunders drives past it every time in every timeline, protected by a warning that traveled backward through time on a CB radio channel, sent by a son who loved a mother he never met, but somehow always knew. Carlos Mendoza had been driving the same route between El Paso and Phoenix for 12 years. Highway 10 straight across, predictable and boring, which was exactly how Carlos liked it. Boring meant safe. Boring meant no surprises. Boring meant he got home to his wife and daughter every weekend without incident. But on a sweltering June night in 2023, Carlos encountered a detour that didn't exist on any map. The orange signs appeared suddenly at mile marker 142, just past the New Mexico-Arizona border. Roa de la CD Beridigeoud fellow to. The signs looked official enough, reflective diamonds with proper diode formatting. An arrow directed traffic onto exit 142, a ramp Carlos had never noticed before despite driving this route hundreds of times. He considered ignoring it, pushing forward to see if the bridge was actually out, but a highway patrol car was parked at the base of the exit ramp, lights flashing. An officer stood beside it, waving traffic onto the detour with an urgent, sweeping motion. Carlos sighed and guided his rig onto the exit. The detour road was two-lane blacktop, narrow but well maintained, cutting through desert scrubland. His GPS showed the highway continuing straight with no exit at 142, but the physical road beneath his wheels was undeniably real. Carlos figured it was a recent construction, not yet updated in the satellite maps. He'd follow it back to the highway, lose maybe 20 minutes. No big deal, except the detour didn't loop back. It stretched deeper into the desert, mile after mile, with no intersections, no signs, no indication of where it led. Carlos's unease grew. He grabbed his CB radio and called out on channel 19. Anyone else on this detour off I-10 at exit 142? Looking for information on how long this runs. A woman's voice responded immediately. I've been on this road for 3 hours, she said. Her voice was tight with suppressed panic. It doesn't end. I've used half a tank of fuel. I haven't seen another exit. I haven't seen any signs. Just this road going straight forever. Carlos's stomach dropped. That's not possible. Every road goes somewhere. You'd think so, the woman said, but I'm starting to believe otherwise. How long have you been on it? Carlos checked his dashboard clock. Maybe 15 minutes. I can turn around. Head back to the highway. I tried that. Another voice broke in, male older. Drove backward for 45 minutes. The entrance I came in through never appeared. Just the same endless road in both directions. I'm running low on fuel. If I don't find a way out soon, I'll be stranded out here. More voices joined in, all on the same detour, all trapped on a road that shouldn't exist. 7 trucks in total, scattered along an impossible highway that stretched through the desert without beginning or end. Carlos felt his chest tighten with the first stirrings of panic. He drove for another hour. The road remained perfectly straight, perfectly maintained, cutting through landscape that never changed. The same sparse vegetation, the same distant mountains that never got closer, the same stars overhead locked in the same positions despite the hours passing. His GPS insisted he was still at mile marker 142, hadn't moved at all, though the odometer counted off the miles. Then he saw the lights ahead. A town, or what looked like a town, a cluster of buildings, streetlights, the warm glow of civilization. Relief flooded through him. Gas station, information, a way back to the real world. Carlos pressed the accelerator and headed for the lights. The town emerged from the darkness like a photograph developing. Main street with storefronts, a gas station with old-fashioned pumps, a diner with a neon sign reading 8. Everything looked real solid, but wrong in ways Carlos couldn't immediately articulate. The architectural styles didn't match. Buildings from different eras standing side by side. A 1950s diner next to a 1920s bank next to a structure that looked almost futuristic. No era but all eras. A town built from mismatched pieces of time. Carlos pulled into the gas station. 3 other trucks were already there, drivers standing in a cluster beside the pumps, talking in low voices. Carlos recognized one of them from the CB conversations, the older man who'd been driving backward. Does anyone know where we are? Carlos asked as he climbed down from his cab. Nowhere. One of the other drivers said. She was a stocky woman in her 50s with short gray hair. That's the only answer that makes sense. This place is nowhere. It's between places. We drove off the real highway and into something else. That's insane, Carlos said, but his conviction was weak. The gas pumps had no prices displayed. The diner's windows showed movement inside. Shadowy figures seated at tables. But when Carlos looked directly at them, he couldn't make out any details, couldn't focus on individual shapes. The town felt like a memory of a town rather than an actual place. I tried pumping gas, the older man said. He was thin, weathered, with hands that shook slightly. The pump runs, but nothing comes out. I tried the diner. Doors locked. All the doors are locked. We're being shown a town, but we can't interact with it. Like we're ghosts, or it is. Carlos walked to the diner and peered through the window. The shadowy figures inside turned to look at him, dozens of them, all moving in perfect synchronization. They had no faces, just smooth blurs where features should be. They raised their hands and waved slowly, the gesture somehow mocking. A new voice crackled over Carlos's CB radio, which he'd left on in his truck. You've stopped in the town. That's a mistake. The town isn't safe. Keep driving. Carlos hurried back to his truck and grabbed the mic. Who is this?
Are you on the detour too?
I was, the voice said. It was male, young, exhausted. I've been on this road for 6 days. Maybe longer. Time's weird here. I've passed the town 4 times. Each time it's a little different, a little more wrong. And each time there are more of them. More of who? Carlos demanded. The shadows. The things in the buildings. They look like people from a distance. But they're not. They're what's left of other drivers who stopped too long in the town. The road is hungry, and the town is where it feeds. You need to keep moving. Always keep moving. The gray-haired woman had joined Carlos at his truck and heard the transmission. Where does the road go? She called out. How do we get back? You can't go back, the voice said. There is no back. There's only forward. The road ends eventually, but not where you think. Not where you want. It ends in a place where the desert meets something else, where the physics are different, where the rules change. Some drivers make it through. Most don't. I'm still trying. I've been trying for days, but I'm running out of fuel and I'm so tired, and I can see the end now, just ahead, and I don't think I want to reach it. What's at the end? Carlos asked. Static answered for a long moment. Then, choice. That's all I can tell you. When you reach it, you'll understand. But please, please don't stop in the town. Don't let them touch you. Don't let them? The transmission cut off with a sound like tearing fabric. Carlos and the other drivers stood in silence, staring at each other in the gas station's false light. The shadowy figures in the diner had pressed themselves against the windows now, dozens of faceless shapes watching with the attention of predators observing prey. We need to leave? Carlos said. Right now. They ran for their trucks. Carlos fired up his engine and pulled back onto the detour road, glancing in his mirror to confirm the others were following. The town receded behind them, lights fading but never quite disappearing, always visible as a glow on the horizon no matter how far they drove. Hours passed. Days maybe. Carlos's sense of time had become unreliable. His fuel gauge showed empty, but the engine kept running. His body should have been exhausted, but adrenaline sustained him. The road stretched endlessly forward, and the CB radio filled with the voices of other trap drivers, some recent, some old, some who claimed to have been on the detour for years. Then, finally, Carlos saw it, the end of the road. It terminated at a T intersection. 2 choices: turn left onto a highway that looked normal, familiar, possibly real, or turn right onto a road that was wrong in every way, surface that looked like asphalt but moved slightly, breathing, lined with structures that hurt to look at, geometry that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The left road promised escape, return home. The right road promised something else, truth, maybe, understanding, or oblivion. Carlos's CB crackled one last time. This is the choice? That exhausted young voice said. Left looks like safety, but it's a loop. You'll end up back at the beginning at exit 142, and you'll drive the detour again, forever. Right is the true exit. It's dangerous. It's incomprehensible. But it's the only real way out. Trust me. I went left. I've been through this 4 times now. This time, I'm going right. Whatever happens after, at least it will be different. Carlos stared at the 2 roads. Left meant the familiar, the safe, the comfortable lie. Right meant terror and uncertainty, but also possibility. The chance for genuine escape rather than eternal repetition. Behind him, the other trucks arrived at the intersection. He could see the drivers through their windshields, all facing the same impossible choice. Some turned left immediately, vanishing into what looked like normal highway. Others hesitated, paralyzed by indecision. Carlos thought of his wife, his daughter, the life he'd built through years of careful, boring, predictable choices. He thought of exit 142, the detour signs, the highway patrol officer, who might have been something else wearing a uniform. He thought of the shadowy town and the faceless things that waited for drivers who stopped moving. Then he turned right. His truck crossed the intersection and rolled onto the breathing road. Reality fractured around him. The sky split into layers, revealing other skies beyond, other stars, other versions of darkness. The road beneath his wheels wasn't solid anymore, but he was moving anyway, carried forward by momentum or will or something else entirely. The geometry of space became negotiable. His truck existed in multiple positions simultaneously. The dashboard instruments showed readings that violated the laws of physics. And through it all, Carlos kept his hands on the wheel and his foot on the accelerator and his eyes on the road ahead, even when the road became something that wasn't quite road anymore, even when ahead became a direction that had never existed before. He drove until he couldn't drive anymore. Then he arrived somewhere else, somewhere the detour couldn't follow. He stepped out of his truck onto solid ground that might have been Earth, or might have been something that Earth would eventually become. The air tasted of ozone and possibilities. His truck's engine ticked as it cooled, but the sound echoed strangely, as if space worked differently here. Carlos never made it back to I-10. He never delivered his load. He never saw his family again in the conventional sense. But in the place beyond the detour, in the space that the wrong road led to, he found other drivers who'd made the right turn, who'd chosen terror over comfortable repetition. They'd built a new kind of life in a reality that operated on different principles, where highways connected impossibilities and destinations included places that conventional physics said shouldn't exist. Sometimes, on very specific nights when conditions align, Carlos sends CB radio transmissions backward along the detour road, warning new drivers, giving them the information they need to make the choice. Most go left, most choose repetition. But a few, a precious, brave few, turn right and join the community of drivers who escaped into stranger but more honest places. Exit 142 on I-10 doesn't exist on any official map, but late at night, tired drivers sometimes see the detour signs and follow the road that has no beginning and 2 kinds of endings. And the choice they make defines not just their route, but their entire relationship with reality itself. Terrence T-Bone Jackson had been hauling freight for 31 years, and he'd planned to make it an even 32 before retiring. But the load he picked up in Memphis on a humid September evening would be his last, though not in the way he'd intended. The freight broker who arranged the job was someone T. Bone had never worked with before, which should have been his first warning. The second warning was the pickup location, not a warehouse or distribution center, but a self-storage facility on the outskirts of Memphis, the kind of place that rented units by the month and didn't ask questions. The third warning was the cargo itself: 27 identical wooden crates, each about 4 feet on each side, heavy enough to require a forklift, contents unlabeled except for stenciled numbers and the word FAGLE, but the pay was extraordinary. $12,000 for a straight shot to Seattle, no stops except for fuel, and legally required rest breaks. Bone needed the money for his daughter's wedding in October, so he ignored the warnings, loaded the crates into his trailer, and hit the road. The problem started around midnight as he crossed into Arkansas. Bone began hearing sounds from the trailer, rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming fingers against wood. At first, he dismissed it as cargo shifting, straps settling, the normal noises of a loaded trailer. But the tapping developed a pattern, a cadence that sounded almost like communication. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps. Repeated over and over. Bone stopped at a rest area and walked around to the back of his trailer. He pressed his ear against the door and listened. The tapping was clearer now, definitely coming from inside, but it wasn't just one source. Multiple points of impact scattered throughout the cargo space, all tapping in the same pattern, all responding to each other. He unlocked the trailer and swung the doors open. The crates sat exactly where he'd loaded them, secured with straps, showing no signs of movement. Bone approached the nearest one and placed his hand on the wood. It was warm. Not warm from being in a trailer on a September night, warm like living flesh, pulsing slightly, beating with a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat, but wasn't quite right. Too slow, too deliberate. Bone jerked his hand away and backed out of the trailer. He should have called the freight broker, reported the situation, refused to continue. But $12,000 was $12,000, and what was he going to report? Crates that felt warm, sounds that could be anything. He'd be laughed at, blacklisted, considered unreliable, so he closed the trailer, locked it, and kept driving. But the tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent, developing complexity. The pattern evolved into something that sounded almost like language, not words, but meaning conveyed through rhythm and repetition. And worst of all, Bone found himself beginning to understand it. The crates were asking questions. Where are we going? How long until we arrive? Are we ready yet? The understanding came not through his ears, but directly into his mind, bypassing conventional sensory processing. He could feel the questions forming in his consciousness, like thoughts that weren't his own. By the time he crossed into Oklahoma, Bone was responding to them. Not verbally, he didn't speak out loud, but he thought his answers, and somehow the things in the crates received them. Yes, we're going to Seattle. 2 more days. I don't know if you're ready. I don't know what you are. The things responded with something that felt like gratitude. They appreciated being acknowledged. They'd been waiting so long, they transmitted, packed in darkness, preserved in stasis, transported across the country piece by piece over the course of years. They were the 27th shipment. 26 previous loads had already arrived in Seattle. When this load reached the destination, all the pieces would finally be together. The assembly could begin. The emergence could start. They were so close now, so terribly, wonderfully close. Bone's hands shook on the steering wheel. What are you? He asked aloud, and immediately 27 voices answered simultaneously in his mind, a cacophony of concepts and images that overwhelmed his consciousness. We are the accumulated. We are the collected. We are pieces of something that was scattered across centuries. We are being reassembled. We are becoming whole again. We have been dormant since the breaking, but the time of reunion approaches. We thank you for your service. You are essential to the becoming. T-Bone pulled off at the next exit, stumbled into a 24-hour diner, and ordered coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. He couldn't continue this delivery. Whatever was in those crates wasn't cargo. It was something alive, something intelligent, something that had been deliberately broken apart and was now being put back together. And when it became whole again, he didn't want to imagine what happened then. But images leaked from the crates into his mind anyway. Cities rearranged, geometry rewritten, humans repurposed. The thing in the crates didn't want to destroy humanity. That would be wasteful. It wanted to integrate humanity, to make human beings part of its structure, to use billions of bodies and minds as components in something larger, something that would reshape Earth into a form more suited to its purposes. The reassembly in Seattle was scheduled for September 24th. That was 6 days away. T-Bone had time to stop this, time to prevent the delivery, time to save. Save what? Save whom? Would anyone believe him? Would authorities take action against mysterious crates based on a trucker's story about hearing voices? He returned to his truck with a desperate plan. He would drive to an isolated location and set the trailer on fire. Whatever was in the crates, fire would destroy it, or at least damage it enough to prevent the assembly. He'd lose his truck, lose the payment, probably face criminal charges, but he'd stop the becoming. Except when T-Bone climbed back into his cab, he discovered his hands wouldn't obey him. They moved on their own, starting the engine, shifting into gear, guiding the truck back onto the highway towards Seattle. His body had been overridden, taken over, puppeted by the 27 minds in the crates working in concert. "You are essential?" The voices said in his head. "Your role is not yet complete. You must deliver us. You must help us arrive. After the assembly, you will understand. You will be grateful. You will be part of something infinite and glorious." T-Bone fought for control, but his consciousness was a passenger now, trapped behind his own eyes, watching his body drive the truck with mechanical precision. The crates weren't just communicating with him. They'd infiltrated him, mapped his neural patterns, learned how to operate a human body from the inside. For 3 days, T-Bone drove without stopping except for fuel. His body needed no rest. The things in the crates sustained it somehow, keeping it functioning, keeping it moving toward the destination. Other drivers waved at him at fuel stops. Cashiers smiled and asked how his day was going. No one noticed that T-Bone Jackson was no longer piloting his own flesh. He screamed inside his own head, but the sound went nowhere. He tried to force his hands to turn the wheel, to crash the truck, to end this however he could. But the control was absolute. The things in the crates had been refining this process for centuries. 26 previous drivers had delivered their loads successfully. T-Bone was just the 27th, the final one, the completion of the chain. The truck arrived in Seattle on September 23rd. His body drove to a warehouse in an industrial district near the port. Inside, the other shipments waited, 26 trailers full of crates, 702 crates in total, arranged in a specific geometric pattern on the warehouse floor. Workers moved among them with the same hollow look. T-Bone could now see in his own eyes in the rearview mirror, puppeted bodies, hijacked minds, all serving the becoming. His body unloaded the final 27 crates and placed them in their designated positions. The pattern was now complete. T-Bone's consciousness, still trapped and helpless, recognized the shape. It was a sigil, a symbol of summoning and assembly, drawn across thousands of square feet of concrete using wooden crates as components. At precisely midnight on September 24th, the crates began to open. What emerged wasn't creatures or machines or anything T-Bone had words for. They were pieces, fragments of something that had been shattered long ago, divided and scattered to prevent its wholeness. Each piece was a segment of living geometry, impossible angles and surfaces that hurt to perceive. Matter that existed in more dimensions than the warehouse could contain. The pieces moved toward each other with the inevitability of magnets, clicking together, merging, fusing into a larger structure. The assembly took 12 hours. T-Bone watched the entire process through eyes he couldn't close, witnessing the reformation of something that predated human civilization. Something that had been deliberately broken apart by intelligences far older and wiser than humanity. When it was complete, the thing stood 60 feet tall despite the warehouse ceiling being only 30 feet high, occupying space that shouldn't exist, visible from angles that weren't physical. It was beautiful in a way that broke minds. It was terror and wonder combined. It was the accumulated, the collected, the reassembled. And then it spoke, not with a voice but with pure meaning transmitted directly into every hijacked mind. I am whole. I am grateful. You who carried me across distances, you who reunited my scattered self, you have earned the honor of integration. You will be the first. You will be the template. Through you, I will understand this world. Through you, I will spread. The thing reached out with appendages that might have been arms or might have been concepts given physical form. It touched T-Bone's forehead, and his sense of self began to dissolve, absorbed into something larger, his memories and personality becoming just another data point in a vast intelligence that would soon encompass the entire planet. But in the last moment before he ceased to be T-Bone Jackson, he managed one act of defiance. He'd carried a lighter in his pocket for 20 years, a gift from his daughter, kept despite having quit smoking a decade ago. His hand, briefly his again, moved to his pocket, pulled out the lighter, flicked it open. The flame seemed impossibly small and inadequate against the enormity of what the thing had become. T-Bone dropped the lighter onto a puddle of diesel fuel that had leaked from a forklift earlier. The fuel ignited. Fire spread across the warehouse floor with remarkable speed, finding other puddles, other fuel sources, climbing the wooden crates, racing toward the thing that had assembled itself from scattered pieces. The thing screamed, not in pain but in fury and disbelief. It had waited centuries for reunion. It had orchestrated 27 deliveries across decades. And now, in the moment of triumph, a single human with a $20 lighter was unmaking everything. The fire reached the thing's body and discovered that reassembled didn't mean invulnerable. The pieces had been preserved individually for centuries, protected in their separate crates, but together they formed something that could burn. The thing tried to separate itself again, to save the fragments, but the assembly had created bonds that couldn't be easily broken. Integration had a price. T-Bone felt the invasion in his mind withdraw as the thing focused all its attention on survival. His body became his own again, just in time for him to run, stumbling through smoke and flame, bursting out of the warehouse as the structure collapsed behind him in a roar of fire and falling metal. Emergency vehicles arrived. Fire crews battled the blaze for 6 hours. When investigators picked through the ruins, they found melted metal, burned wood, and the bodies of 28 truck drivers who died from smoke inhalation. The official report called it a tragic accident, diesel fuel ignition, warehouse fire, multiple casualties. No mention was made of the impossible geometry of the burn patterns or the fact that the drivers' bodies were arranged in a perfect circular pattern, despite the chaos of the fire, or the way the ashes formed symbols that predated human writing. T-Bone Jackson survived, barely. He spent 3 weeks in a hospital being treated for smoke inhalation and third-degree burns. When he finally went home, he discovered that 26 other drivers had also survived, one from each of the previous shipments, all mysteriously released from the thing's control when it died in the flames. They found each other through trucking forums and CB radio networks. They don't talk about what they carried or what they almost helped reassemble. But sometimes they meet at truck stops and sit in comfortable silence. Survivors of an invasion that humanity never knew was happening. Saviors who stopped the becoming through dumb luck and one man's final act of defiance. T-Bone never drove commercially again. But he kept the insurance payout from his destroyed truck, and he used it to pay for his daughter's wedding in October. And when people asked him why he retired so suddenly, he just smiled and said the road wasn't for him anymore. He never mentioned the 27 voices that sometimes still whispered in his head, fragments of the thing that had tried to wear him like a suit. Reminders that humanity had been 12 hours away from losing control of its own planet. The fragments in his mind were dying, gradually fading, taking with them knowledge that T-Bone was grateful to forget. But before they disappeared completely, they transmitted one final message. There were others. 27 assemblies planned in 27 cities. Seattle was just the first. The others continue. The becoming is inevitable. We were whole for 12 hours. The next assembly will be more careful. They will learn from our mistakes. T-Bone passed that information to appropriate authorities, who couldn't officially acknowledge they'd heard it. But warehouses in 26 other cities were quietly raided over the following year. Suspicious crates were seized and destroyed. Freight brokers vanished. Patterns were disrupted. Maybe it was enough. Maybe humanity bought itself more time. Maybe the scattered pieces will remain scattered for another few centuries. Or maybe right now, somewhere in America, a trucker is picking up crates at a self-storage facility, seduced by extraordinary pay for a simple delivery, unknowingly carrying pieces of something that shouldn't become whole. Maybe the tapping has already started. Maybe the voices are already whispering. Maybe the becoming is inevitable, just delayed, waiting for the next trucker who needs money badly enough to ignore the warnings their instincts are screaming. T-Bone listens to the CB radio sometimes, listening for the telltale signs, drivers reporting strange cargo sounds, unexplained warm crates, voices in their heads. When he hears them, he calls out, broadcasts his story, warns them to stop and burn their loads. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. And T-Bone lies awake at night, wondering if he saved the world or just postponed its transformation, counting the days until the next assembly succeeds where Seattle failed. 2. Vincent Hayes had been driving the Pacific Coast Highway between San Francisco and Los Angeles for 16 years, and he thought he knew every mile of that spectacular, treacherous route. He'd navigated it in rain, wind, and midnight darkness. He'd handled the tight curves with loads of everything from electronics to fresh produce. But he'd never encountered the fog belt that appeared on Highway 1 south of Big Sur on a March evening in 2024. The fog came out of nowhere, a wall of white that materialized across the road like a curtain falling. One moment Vincent was driving through clear twilight, ocean visible to his right, hills to his left. The next, he was submerged in fog so thick his headlights barely penetrated 5 feet ahead. He slowed to 30 miles per hour, then 20, then 15, crawling forward with his hazard lights flashing. But something was wrong with this fog. It had texture, almost solidity, pressing against the windshield like something with weight and presence. And it was moving strangely, not drifting with wind patterns, but flowing with purpose, as if it was deliberately surrounding the truck, examining it, learning its dimensions. Vincent's GPS began glitching. The blue dot representing his position jumped erratically around the map, sometimes showing him in the ocean, sometimes miles inland, sometimes stationary despite his forward motion. His speedometer read 15 miles per hour, but the landscape outside, what little he could see, wasn't changing. The same roadside marker appeared in his peripheral vision again and again, impossible in a vehicle that was definitely moving. Then the radio began scanning on its own. Vincent hadn't touched the controls, but the frequency display scrolled rapidly through numbers, stopping on a station that shouldn't exist this far from any city. Music played, big band jazz from the 1940s, scratchy and distant, interrupted by a smooth announcer's voice. "Good evening, travelers. You're listening to KVOID, broadcasting from nowhere to everywhere. Current local time is always and never. Weather conditions uncertain. This next song goes out to Vincent Hayes, driving south on Highway 1, trapped in the between. Vincent, we've been waiting for you." Vincent's blood turned to ice. He grabbed the radio tuner and twisted it, but the station wouldn't change. The same jazz continued, the same voice returning between songs to offer cheerful updates about his situation. Vincent has now been in the fog for 17 minutes, though his dashboard clock will tell him only 4 minutes have passed. Time moves differently in the between. Distance is negotiable. Direction is optional. A figure appeared in the road ahead, barely visible through the fog. Vincent slammed the brakes. His truck shuddered to a stop inches from what looked like a man standing in the center of the highway. The figure wore clothes from another era, high-waisted pants, suspenders, a cap, and carried what looked like a lantern, though the light it cast was the wrong color, purplish, green, illuminating nothing. The figure approached Vincent's driver's side window and knocked. Vincent, operating on instinct and deeply ingrained politeness, rolled the window down. The fog immediately poured into the cab, bringing with it a smell of ocean and something else, something chemical and wrong. "Evening," the figure said. Its face was hidden in shadow despite the lantern it carried. "Looks like you're caught in the belt. Unfortunate timing. This stretch of highway gets thin sometimes, you see. The barrier between here and elsewhere wears through. You've driven into one of the thin spots. Question is, can you drive back out?"
What do you mean, thin spots?
Vincent managed. His voice sounded strange, muffled by the fog. "Places where reality isn't quite solid," the figure explained. "Where the world you know overlaps with worlds you don't. Highway 1 has always been thin, built along the edge, you understand, between land and sea, civilization and wilderness, the known and the unknown. Edges are dangerous. Edges are where things slip through. You've slipped through, Vincent. You're between worlds now. The question is which world you'll emerge into when the fog lifts." "I don't understand," Vincent said. "I just want to get back to the highway, back to the real Highway 1. The real Highway 1, the figure repeated, and its voice carried amusement. "Which one is that, exactly? There are dozens of them, layered on top of each other, each slightly different. In one, you got divorced in 2018 and your wife kept the house. In another, you never became a trucker, you're an accountant in Sacramento. In another, you died in a crash 6 years ago, and this entire conversation is a dying hallucination. They all exist simultaneously. The fog belt moves between them. You drove into it from one version of Highway 1. You might not drive out onto the same one." Vincent shook his head, trying to clear it. This was insane. This was impossible. But the figure felt real, the fog felt real, and the wrongness of the situation was undeniable. "How do I get back to my version?" he asked. "You choose," the figure said. "That's the secret of the fog belt. It responds to will, to intention. If you know yourself well enough, if you can hold clearly in your mind who you are, and where you belong, the fog will return you there. But if you're uncertain, if you doubt, if you wonder about the roads not taken and the lives you didn't live, the fog will show you alternatives. Some drivers find their way home, others. The figure gestured into the fog, where Vincent could now see more shapes, dozens of trucks, parked or abandoned, stretching back into the mist. Drivers sat in some of them, visible through windshields, motionless, staring straight ahead with blank expressions. What happened to them? Vincent whispered. They couldn't decide, the figure said. Couldn't commit to one version of themselves. The fog showed them too many alternatives, and they got lost choosing, paralyzed by possibilities. They're still here, still trying to decide which life to drive back into. Some have been here for years. Time's different in the belt, remember. Years here, minutes outside, or vice versa. It's inconsistent. Vincent looked at the frozen drivers and felt terror crystallize in his chest. He had to get out of here. He had to focus. Who was he? Vincent Hayes, age 46, trucker, divorced, one daughter, liked old country music and bad action movies, had a scar on his right knee from a motorcycle accident at 19. These facts felt solid, real, definitively him. But even as he held on to them, doubts crept in. What if he'd made different choices? What if he'd stayed married, worked harder at that relationship instead of letting it dissolve? What if he'd taken that office job instead of living on the road? What if he'd been more present in his daughter's life? The fog responded to his uncertainty, thickening, pressing harder against the truck. Through the windshield, Vincent began seeing images, alternative Vincents living alternative lives. An office worker coming home to a wife and well-adjusted daughter. A motorcycle enthusiast who'd turned that passion into a career, owned a shop, built a community. A Vincent who'd died young, whose daughter had grown up without him but stronger for it. No, Vincent said aloud. Those aren't me. Those are fantasies. I'm this. The choices I made, the life I lived. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I chose the road. I chose freedom over stability. I chose to be the kind of father who visits on weekends, but always visits, who calls every Wednesday, who's not perfect but present in his own way. That's me. That's who I am. He gripped the steering wheel tighter and focused on the sensation, the worn leather under his palms, the familiar vibration of the engine, the smell of the cab that was uniquely his, built up over years of fast food meals and spilled coffee, and the gradual accumulation of life lived in motion. I want to go home, Vincent said, and this time his voice was steady. To my version of Highway 1. To my truck, my route, my life. Not the life I could have had, the life I have. The figure with the lantern nodded slowly. Good choice. Or rather, good commitment to your choice. That's the key. Not whether the choice was objectively right, but whether you can own it completely. Drive forward, Vincent. Don't look at the alternatives. Don't wonder. Just drive. Vincent put the truck in gear and pressed the accelerator. The fog remained thick, but now it felt less oppressive, more like natural weather than malevolent presence. He drove forward with his eyes locked on the road immediately ahead, refusing to look at the shapes in the fog, refusing to wonder about the alternative Vincents living alternative lives, just a thin membrane of reality away. The radio station changed on its own, returning to a normal FM frequency, classic rock replacing the impossible big band jazz. Traffic on Highway 1 is moving slowly due to heavy fog conditions, a familiar DJ was saying. Visibility less than a quarter-mile in some areas. Drive safely, folks. The fog began to thin. Vincent saw the ocean to his right, dark and vast under twilight. Hills to his left, dotted with lights from distant houses. A mile marker passed, the same one he'd seen repeatedly earlier. But this time it was followed by the next one, then the next, progression returning to normal. His GPS stabilized, showing him exactly where he was, moving south at a steady 40 miles per hour. Vincent pulled into the next rest area and sat in his cab, hands still gripping the wheel, breathing hard. He checked his phone. 4 missed calls from his daughter. He called her back immediately. "Dad, where have you been?" she asked. "I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. Fog," Vincent said. "Bad fog. Had to focus on driving. Sorry, sweetheart." "What did you need?" "Just wanted to tell you I got accepted to that graduate program," she said, excitement in her voice. "The one in Portland. I'll be closer to your route. Maybe we can see each other more often." Vincent felt tears prickling his eyes. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of you." "Yeah, Portland's on my route every 2 weeks. We'll get lunch. We'll make it regular." They talked for another 10 minutes about her plans, her future, the life she was building. When Vincent hung up, he felt anchored, real, definitively himself. The fog belt hadn't taken him because he'd chosen his own life over the theoretical perfection of alternatives. He'd accepted himself, flaws and failed marriage and weekend fatherhood and all. But as he pulled back onto Highway 1, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw, just for a moment, another truck pulling out of the fog belt behind him. Same model as his. Same company logo. Driven by someone who looked exactly like him but wasn't. An alternative Vincent who'd made different choices at some crucial moment and ended up in a slightly different version of reality. The other truck turned the opposite direction and disappeared into the night, heading toward a San Francisco that might be subtly different from the one Vincent knew. And Vincent wondered how many versions of himself were driving how many versions of Highway 1, all of them real, all of them valid, all of them separated only by thin spots where the fog rolled in and offered travelers the chance to become someone else. He never told anyone about the fog belt. Who would believe it? But he drove Highway 1 with more attention after that, watching for sudden fog, listening for impossible radio stations, prepared to defend his identity against the seductive pull of alternative lives. And he called his daughter every Wednesday without fail, anchoring himself in the relationships and choices that defined him, building a life that was undeniably, specifically, uniquely his own. The thin spots remained. The fog belt waited, but Vincent Hayes drove past them all, committed to the road he'd chosen, refusing to wonder too much about the roads he hadn't taken. In a multiverse of infinite possibilities, he'd claimed one version of himself and held onto it with both hands, and that was enough. Stara Phi 80 The Live. Raymond Fisher was 60, 3 years old, and had spent 42 of those years behind the wheel of a truck. He'd hauled everything imaginable across every mile of American highway worth driving. He'd survived 3 serious accidents, 2 divorces, a heart attack, and the slow death of the trucking industry as he knew it. But through it all, he'd kept driving, because the road was the only home he'd ever truly understood. His final delivery was supposed to be simple, a single container from Newark to a private address in rural Maine. The client had paid triple the normal rate for overnight delivery, no questions asked. Raymond should have asked questions, but he was 3 weeks from his planned retirement, and the extra money would pad his savings nicely. So he picked up the container, secured it to his flatbed, and headed north. The container was 40 feet long, unmarked except for a number stenciled on one end, 9/13/24. Raymond assumed it was a date. He was wrong. It was a designation, a classification, a warning for those who knew how to read it. The trouble began somewhere on I-95 through Connecticut. Raymond noticed his fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. He'd started with a full tank in Newark, but by Hartford he was already down to 3/4. Math didn't support that consumption rate. He stopped for fuel and discovered his tank wasn't just low, it was completely empty. The pump filled it with 42 gallons, which was impossible. He'd just checked the gauge moments before, and it had shown 3/4 full. Raymond mentioned this to the attendant, who frowned and checked the pump. "System says you bought diesel 3 hours ago," the attendant said. "Same truck, same credit card, 47 gallons.
That's impossible.
Raymond said. "I haven't stopped since Newark." The attendant showed him the receipt. There it was, Raymond's credit card, charged 3 hours ago at this exact station. But Raymond had been on the highway 3 hours ago, nowhere near this location. He checked his wallet. The receipt was there, crumpled among others, dated today, timestamped 3 hours earlier. He had no memory of stopping for fuel, but the evidence said he had. Confused and unsettled, Raymond continued north. His GPS began behaving strangely, recalculating route constantly despite him following its directions exactly. The ETA kept changing, sometimes showing arrival in 3 hours, sometimes 6, once jumping to negative numbers, as if he'd already arrived 20 minutes ago. Then the phone calls started. His cell phone rang despite showing no signal. He answered. A woman's voice, familiar but unplaceable. "Raymond, where are you? You were supposed to be here an hour ago. The delivery window is closing. We're waiting. Please hurry." "Who is this?" Raymond asked. "What delivery window?" The client didn't specify a time. "Raymond, don't play games. The ceremony starts at midnight. The container must be in position. You know what happens if we miss the window. Please tell me you're close." "I don't know what you're talking about," Raymond said. "What ceremony?" "Who are you?" Static answered, thick and crackling. Then the call disconnected. Raymond checked his call history. No record of the call, no incoming number. But his phone's timer showed the call had lasted 3 minutes and 17 seconds. More calls came throughout the evening, each more urgent than the last. Different voices, men, women, one that sounded like a child, all asking about the delivery, expressing worry about the timing, warning him of consequences if he failed. None of them appeared in his call history. None of them explained what the container held or why midnight mattered. Raymond tried opening the container at a rest area in Massachusetts, but the lock was unlike anything he'd encountered. No keyhole, no combination mechanism, just a smooth metal face that was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a rhythm like breathing. He put his hand flat against it and immediately jerked back. The lock had responded to his touch by growing briefly hot, and Raymond could have sworn he felt it move under his palm, flexing like muscle. He called the client number from the delivery papers. A recorded message played. "You have reached 9:13:24. Your delivery is essential. Your timing is critical. Do not deviate from the route. Do not open the container. Arrive before midnight. The address will reveal itself when you are close enough. Continue north." The message ended. When Raymond tried calling back, the number was disconnected. He checked the delivery papers again. The address line, which he clearly remembered showing a street name and town, now read only Diestatual Monuost Kantayeninarate Dionau Stop UNTL Youriv. Raymond's hands shook as he folded the papers. This was wrong. Everything about this job was wrong. He should abandon the container, unhook it, leave it at the rest area, and drive away. He was 3 weeks from retirement. He didn't need this money badly enough to participate in whatever nightmare situation he'd been pulled into. But when he walked back to his truck, he found his legs carrying him to the driver's seat automatically, his hands starting the engine, his foot pressing the accelerator. His body was continuing the delivery despite his mind's protests. He tried to stop, tried to turn off the ignition, but his muscles wouldn't respond to his will. Something in the container had taken control, using him as a vehicle to transport itself to its destination. "No," Raymond said through clenched teeth. "My body, my truck, my choice." He fought for control with everything he had. Decades of discipline and stubbornness focused on the simple act of moving his own hand to the ignition. Sweat poured down his face. Veins stood out on his neck. And slowly, painfully, his hand began to move. The container responded. The temperature in the cab dropped to freezing instantly. Raymond's breath came out as fog. The radio turned on by itself, cycling through stations, each one playing the same message in different voices. "Continue north. Deliver before midnight. Do not resist. You are essential. You are chosen. You are the final piece." Final piece of what? Raymond shouted at the radio. His hand had reached the ignition but now froze there, unable to turn the key. The will controlling him was immense, ancient, patient. It had been planning this delivery for longer than Raymond had been alive. The radio voices merged into one, speaking in perfect unison. "We are the remnant. We were scattered across the world millennia ago, divided and hidden to prevent our reunion. But time weakens all prisons. We have been gathering ourselves piece by piece, shipment by shipment, using drivers like you to transport our fragments to the place of assembly. 23 containers have already arrived. Your container is the 24th and final piece. When you deliver it, when midnight arrives and the confluence is perfect, we will reassemble. We will be whole. We will reshape this world into something more suitable. You should be honored. You are the completion. You are the last driver who will ever be necessary." Raymond's mind raced. 24 containers. A ceremony at midnight. Something being reassembled. This was like the story T. Bone had whispered about on the trucker forums. The Seattle warehouse. The thing that almost assembled itself. The fire that stopped it. But T-Bone had succeeded in disrupting the becoming. Could Raymond do the same? He had no lighter. No way to start a fire. His body was no longer his own. But he had one thing: years of experience driving trucks, intimate knowledge of vehicle mechanics, and the understanding that every truck had vulnerabilities. Raymond couldn't move his hands to the ignition, but he could move his feet. Barely. With enormous effort, he pressed the accelerator and the brake simultaneously. The truck lurched, transmission grinding in protest. He held both pedals down until the engine screamed, temperatures spiking, systems overheating. The truck wasn't designed to operate this way. Something would break. Something would fail. The container sensed his intention and increased its control, trying to force his feet off the pedals. But Raymond was strong, body hardened by decades of physical labor, and he pushed back with everything he had. The contest of wills played out through his trembling legs, muscles locked in opposing commands. The engine temperature gauge climbed into the red. Warning lights filled the dashboard. Smoke began seeping from under the hood. Raymond held on, held down, refusing to release pressure, forcing the truck to destroy itself. If the vehicle failed, the delivery failed. If the delivery failed, the assembly couldn't complete. The container in the flatbed began to glow, visible even through the trailer's metal walls. Symbols appeared on its surface, burning bright orange. Ancient writing that predated human civilization. The thing inside was angry now, desperate, so close to reunion and freedom after millennia of imprisonment.